Alrighty, hello everybody, and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast. My name is Jez, and I'm the host. The Magical Learning Podcast is a podcast that looks at business and life in a fun and exciting way, and we love to get experts in, and you'll see that in the title of this, we have an expert in today, and we'll get to them very shortly. As always, we have to check in with our regular team before we get into all this, so let's start with Danette. Danette, you were the last on, but you're going to be the first to tell us how your week's gone. You have jumped on, you've just arrived home. What's been going on?
Yeah, big week. So started at the farm, then went to Canberra, then went to Sydney, hung out with Graham and John in Sydney yesterday at a conference, and then up bright and early this morning, back through Canberra, and then continued on to the farm. So literally got home 5 minutes ago, but it's been a good week. So thank you, Jez.
That's all right. Instead of frequent flyer miles, I need to give you frequent driver miles, traveling all around New South Wales.
Yeah, some of that was Graham driving. He definitely got more than me.
Well, let's hand it over to Graham. Graham, our resident CEO and Top Gear expert, tell us about how the drive has been. How's the week been?
Cheers. What a great question, and thank you for asking. Look, grateful to be back in one place in one piece after a little trip up the road. I met some nice people yesterday, which was fun. I'm very excited about the fact that I'm at this stage not driving anywhere next week. I think we've racked up about 3,000 Ks in the last 2 weeks. So, by the way, sorry, if I get really quickly, yes, I know this is all about me, but Mr. Smith, Dick Smith, if you are listening, if you've got a spare helicopter, yes, we need one. Thank you.
We should get onto that. Well, we haven't really thought about entering the helicopter game as Magical Learning, but it's a little area to think about growth into.
Why not?
Why not? Why not? We can do a podcast from a helicopter, the helicopter pod. Anyway, let's go to John. John, how's your week been? You are recording live from the pool room, our favorite recording studio. How's things?
That's fantastic in the pool room, Jez. The vibe is really good. But no, look, it's great. Caught up with Danette and Graham the last 2 days, which has been fantastic. Having a driver do all the driving is even better. So, no, it's most enjoyable.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that, John, and great to have you on. And our guest, Claire Gray, how's your week going?
My week's going really well. I was trying to think of what I'd done all week because, as I said, literally 10 minutes before dialing in, my book arrived and I wasn't supposed to come until Monday and it came early. And so I have my book in my hot little hands and I literally just opened the box after, my husband and I carried all the boxes inside the house in the heat. So it's hard to think what I did before this, but earlier in the week I was traveling through New South Wales as well, but I got a plane because I'm in Byron Bay and I flew to Sydney. So I was facilitating an emerging leaders program actually for the construction industry. So that was lots of fun. Also recorded a podcast on my Thriving Leaders podcast with Gabrielle Dolan. So that was great because she's got her book coming out in November too. And lots of prep. It's the next 2 weeks I'm home, but I've been traveling a lot and I'm about to travel again, but I've got 2 weeks at home, which I'm super excited about, and the book launch. So yeah, that's me.
Well, we're very excited to have you on. If you're listening to this, you can buy this. You can pre-order the book right now. It's coming out in 2 days from the release of this podcast. So on Wednesday, it's ready to buy. And Claire has just shown you the cover. They're very excited to be here. They must have known that we were recording the Magical Learning Podcast. You were here to promote it so we could get the first look.
Yeah, that magic really, really is true. No.
That's it. Well, Claire, you are a friend of the podcast. You've been on before, but before we get into today's topic, your book, and sort of a little bit more of a specific element of that, I was just wondering could you maybe tell us about yourself for listeners that may be being introduced to you for the first time?
Yeah, awesome. So I'm a leadership and team facilitator and coach. So I do work with lots of leadership teams or executive teams. So that's sort of the basis of Thriving Teams, my second book. But I also facilitate lots of leadership development programs based on my Thriving Leaders model and book that I wrote 3 years ago. And I also do conference keynotes or conference emceeing, and I also have some coaching clients. So work with lots of different industries, which keeps things interesting and fun. And yeah, live in Byron Bay, originally from Melbourne. I've got 2 boys and as we're recording this, it is Halloween. So, straight after this, I'll be picking my son up early from school and getting into the Halloween spirit. And Jez and I have been joking because the last time I was on the podcast was actually on Valentine's Day. So we seem to have a little bit of a theme going. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We're gonna every single holiday. Claire's on. I was saying it should be called the Holla Grey Specials. We're gonna work on the branding and everything for it, but it's a nice bit of cross promotion that I think, Claire, it just makes sense. Honestly,
It does. It does.
you just have to write a book that has to be released briefly after each holiday, and I think we'll be all lined up.
It's going to keep me very busy.
Yeah, that's it. Well, speaking of books that are being released, your new book, Thriving Teams, which you just showed before for people that are watching on YouTube or Spotify. Do you want to tell us, before we get into today's conversation, that's it, check it out on the video. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this book before we get into today's conversation?
Yeah, sure. So the book's called Thriving Teams: When Teams Unite, Align and Achieve. And I guess I've been working with leadership teams using this model because the model is in my first book, Thriving Leaders, for years and years. And I always wanted to deep dive, because it's just a small chapter in my first book, and really wanted to deep dive on what makes a thriving team. And I had these aspirations to do research and started, talking to people about how I could go about doing research to support the book. And lo and behold, as I was going through the process, I actually found a whole bunch of research, thank you, McKinsey, that just got published post-COVID that literally supported my model. And so I pretty much saved myself 2 years of work. But at the same time, I also went out and interviewed thought leaders from across the world, such as Amy Edmondson, David Clutterbuck, Dermot Crowley, lots of different thought leaders from around the world, to interview them for the book. And I was lucky enough that Amy and David actually wrote the foreword and the afterword for me for my book. So that meant a huge amount, because I've just followed their work for so long. But also interviewed, I've got 4 case studies with Australian organisations that are in the book as well, to bring it all to life. So really, really, proud of Thriving Teams. And yeah, it's just exciting that it's finally arrived.
We're so excited for you, and we're excited to be part of the sort of press tour of this book to get it out there and get the word out there. I think we're going to be talking today about how to have healthy debate, which is an amazing conversation. I'm really excited to get into that, along with your Thriving Teams concept. But let's start with Danette.
Yeah.
Danette, Danette always likes to set the table with questions, so I'm going to throw to Danette. Tell us about your questions and tell us a bit about why you chose them.
First of all, congratulations on number 2, Claire. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Well done. I'll do my party dance. I was really curious because healthy debate, I suppose there's a need for understanding why we're here in teams and stuff like that. So I first of all was really curious, what's your definition of purpose?
Yeah. So like pretty much all research on high-performing teams talks about having a team purpose. But for me, purpose is really that belief that guides us. It's, the question of like, what gets you out of bed in the morning? What motivates you? And when I think about purpose, I think about it on 4 levels. So at the highest level is the organization's purpose. So why does the organization exist? Simon Sinek's got a very, famous video about that. But really, that's what connects people to the why of an organization, when you've articulated a purpose that's really meaningful for people and they can see how they contribute towards that purpose. At the next level is a team purpose. So why the team exists. So it's not the goal of what the team is trying to achieve, which often people think that's what a team purpose is. It's why the team exists. What's the legacy that the team wants to leave? And it's often the thing that really binds the team together. Then when we think about purpose as well, it's also about meaningful work. To be part of a high-performing team, you need to feel like your work matters and that you're contributing to something bigger than yourself. And so as leaders, leaders need to connect their teams to the work that they do each day, as well as connecting to the team's purpose and the organization's purpose. And then at the lowest level, but it's probably the most important, is everyone has their own individual values or personal values too. And so how do we draw the thread between all 4 of those things? But, if we're thinking about teams and even teams having healthy debate, starting with purpose is the best place to start before you even go down the path of having debate, and really co-creating what that purpose looks like as well. Then it makes it very, very meaningful as well for the team. When in the book, I interviewed an organisation called Hive Legal. So they disrupted the legal sector about 10 plus years ago because they were one of the first law firms that didn't have billable hours. So they threw that out the window, and they wanted to have to price on value, but they also wanted to create a really awesome place to work. And so they spent a lot of time crafting what their organization's purpose is. And they then talked about how they actually have individual conversations with their people to connect their people to the purpose of the organisation and their own individual whys. And I think it's just a great case study of how we need to connect people to purpose on a number of different layers to play to people's strengths as well. And they've just recently, actually just before I interviewed them for the book, had actually refreshed after 10 years their organisation's purpose because things had shifted. They'd kind of matured as an organisation too. So it's not a set and forget. It's something that you do revisit. Obviously, team purpose you might revisit more frequently, but an organisation's purpose you also revisit too.
Nice, great answer. And I love that case study too.
Yeah.
So my next question is, what do leaders need to do to create teams that thrive around purpose? Because again, I'm assuming that if we're not clear on our purpose, the healthy debate's not always going to be that healthy.
Yeah. So I think what the first thing to do is actually get everyone in a room to actually talk about, what drives each of us, what are our individual values, and talk about like, why does the team exist? What's the legacy that you want to leave as well, and articulating a purpose statement. The week before last, I was actually with a leadership team for the first time, and I was a newishly formed team. They'd been together for about, 6 to 12 months. And we were creating a team purpose, using the whiteboard and kind of editing. And then someone just called out, we thought we'd, arrived at the team's purpose. And then someone called out and it's like, this isn't our purpose, just called out like, this isn't our purpose. This could be any team. So you actually need it to be meaningful to your team as well, and make sure that it actually resonates with people, because often it becomes jargon and it's quite meaningless, but then it's about how you actually bring it to life every day. So what are the ways that you can hold each other accountable and bring your values, the team purpose to life? I also like to create some team values or behaviours as well. And often it's just, 3 behaviours that we want to highlight that maybe the team's not demonstrating that we want to actually reinforce. And even, building that into how you operate. So whether that's in your team meetings, having a meeting observer and actually rotating that role. So for the last 5 minutes, you actually get feedback on, are we living our purpose? Did we demonstrate the values and behaviours we wanted to demonstrate? And what do we want to try and do for our next team meeting? And it can take between 3 to 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be something that's overly cumbersome either.
Love that answer. Thanks, Claire.
Yeah, love that. Thanks, Danette. Well, let's throw to Graham. Graham, did you have a question?
My question was around psychological safety. And I actually just tweeted a minute ago that I remember reading something recently where Amy Edmondson was quoted as saying that we have, like, the whole idea around psychological safety has been sort of distorted to some extent. And it has become a bit of a catch-all for a whole bunch of things. But it's also often like a get-out-of-jail-free clause or card for someone who doesn't want to front up. So I'm just curious about it. Feels like a lot of the time the weight of responsibility and accountability and expectation for creating a psychologically safe workplace rests with the employer. But I'm curious in all the work that you've done, particularly with teams, and when we talk about things like team purpose and team values and the behaviours that we want to see in our team, what's your thoughts on how team members can actually contribute to psychological safety to some extent, regardless of what their employer might do?
Yeah.
Did any of that make sense?
Yeah, 100%, loud and clear. So, and I think it's an and, not an or. Like, I don't think it sits with the leader. I don't think it sits with the team. It's both. But even just to take a step back, if we think about the why that you were speaking about before, the purpose is the why. And then if you think about relationships, that's the how. And the how is both psychological safety and trust. So do you think about trust being on a one-to-one relationship level? So we will have different levels of trust with individuals within a team, and you'll observe different levels of trust between people. But psychological safety is the environment that's created where we can take interpersonal risks as a group. So when we think about being able to take interpersonal risks as a group, this is like, raising our hand when we've made a mistake, sharing when we don't have the answers. It's also being able to share a really bold idea without being cut down in a team too. And so I think, to your point, Graham, there's a bit of a false assumption that psychological safety is easy. In fact, McKinsey's actually done a study to say that only 26% of leaders actually consistently demonstrate behaviours that contribute to psychological safety. So we assume that this is something that's easy. And the other common misconception, I think, is that people think it's about being nice, and it's actually not at all. It's actually about having tough conversations. It's about disagreeing, debating, sharing diverse perspectives and ideas. And polite and passive cultures are the ones that don't innovate and don't lead to high performance either. So every team's going to have a slightly different vibe in it, and that's shaped by who's in it and how they behave. And obviously the leader, has authority and they do set the tone, but it's not just the leader that's going to influence the psychological safety within the team. I do think the leader has authority to be able to call out or spot tensions or behaviours that are unhelpful for the team as well. But, every team member plays a role in creating the psychological safety. I think psychological safety is one of those things you can't just say, how psychologically safe does everyone feel in the team? Because, if people don't feel safe, no one's going to say anything. And I think that's why Amy Edmondson talks about focusing on the goal that the team's trying to achieve and what that actually requires of us. So psychological safety is not the end goal. Achieving the goal is, and psychological safety is almost what's required of us or the behaviours to be able to have the environment to achieve that goal.
Yep.
So, discussing with the team, why we're here and what the purpose is, what we're here to achieve in terms of goals and that clear direction or accountability. And then, how do we need to interact, going back to those behaviours and values. But if we're going to, think about what role we play individually within a team, it's all the little actions that we take that make the biggest difference. And I think, just being mindful of, are you listening to learn, and suspending judgment? Are you asking curious questions? And are you speaking up? Because often, people who don't speak up in meetings, that's perceived in a number of different ways. People might think that they're holding back. People might think, there's a whole lot of assumptions that we make when we don't hear from people, and then we don't get their perspectives too.
Yeah.
So we really need to, role model the vulnerability and humility. We need to let go of past experiences as well, because depending on our experience in previous teams, we might be less likely we might have come from an environment that wasn't psychologically safe, and we carry that baggage with us. So sometimes we have to let go of some of that baggage. And we also just need to understand that psychological safety also changes based on tenure in the team too. Often when we first start in a team, we're quite excited, and around the 1 year mark, they say that often psychological safety dips because people start to hold back a little bit, don't want to say that they don't have the answer because they feel like they should. So there's so many contributing factors, but I think listening to learn, asking curious questions, and sharing your perspective is kind of key things to focus on.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. Thank you. I do have a follow-up question, but I might leave it till the end if we have time. But thanks for that, Claire. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Graham.
Awesome. Well, I might go to Alan's question quickly here. Alan's written this one in. And Alan's written, in your book, you talk about having a balance between accountability and psychological safety. Can you explain the thinking behind this, finding this balance, please? I know we've been talking a little bit about this, but I think we can, dive in just a little bit more for that one. So thanks, Claire.
Yeah. And obviously, I love talking about accountability. The podcast I was on at the start of the year was fully based on accountability. So sort of going back to what makes up a thriving team. We mentioned purpose is the why, and then relationships is the how, and then accountability is the what and the when. And so the intersection between the relationships and the accountability is around being able to challenge and support each other. So to Alan's, question, that tension that sits between accountability and psychological safety is sometimes hard to get that balance right, because we want to be able to challenge each other, but we also want to be able to do it in a way that we're in a safe environment to be able to do that. So Amy Edmondson, who I was lucky enough who wrote the foreword for the book, in her great book called The Fearless Organisation, she talks to a 2x2 matrix, which looks at accountability and psychological safety. And what's really interesting is, if you're in a team or an organisation, when there's low accountability and low psychological safety, that's often when people feel quite detached. She calls it the apathy zone. But, if there isn't a safe environment and there's no accountability, people are just kind of plodding along. When we've got really high psychological safety but low accountability, that's where people get into the comfort zone. And that's what you often see in the nice and passive cultures. We're not having the hard conversation. We're not following people up because they didn't do what they said they're going to do. But it feels kind of nice and comfortable, but we're probably not pushing ourselves. When there's that high accountability but low psychological safety, that's when we get into the anxiety zone. People feel burnt out. They feel a lot of pressure, and that's probably not a nice place to be. Often people will leave if they're in that environment for too long. And so getting the balance right is when we get high accountability and high psychological safety. That's the sweet spot, and that's called a learning culture. And I think that's where teams thrive. It's really where we can have that healthy debate. We can challenge each other. That's where we can do our best work. We make a mistake, we fail, we learn from it, we learn from our successes as well. But that's the environment that we want to create. So that's why psychological safety and accountability are so cornerstone to creating the environment for healthy debate, but for a thriving team as well. Because you say what you need to say in the interest of getting the best outcome for the team.
Yeah, love that. I'm taking so many notes. I might throw to John. John, did you have a question today about about today's topic?
Yeah, I do. Claire, so you talk about a healthy debate, but for some people, a healthy debate can be really, really challenging, and especially as they're building towards that psychological safety. So what are some strategies to draw people out so that they can participate rather than sit there and say nothing?
So it's such an interesting one because even the word debate is so I wanted to say contagious, but I'm trying to say contentious, maybe contagious for some. And I'll share a personal story. So when I did my interview with David Clutterbuck, and so David Clutterbuck's written 70 books, a lot on teams and team coaching, and I studied under him a couple of years ago. So I really admire David Clutterbuck. And I asked him the question about healthy debate, and he really challenged me, which the irony wasn't lost on me because I then was debating the word debate on whether that's the right word to use with teams. And, he talked about the negative connotations of debate because it's often people want to defend themselves and, it links with conflict and other things like that. And so it really got me thinking about the language about healthy debate. And I guess I went through this process of, do I change the word to dialogue or, but it just didn't feel like it had the tension in it that I think you need in a high-performing team. And so I actually write about it in the book about how I debated debate because, it's a little bit ironic. But I guess what's at the heart of healthy debate is about high-quality conversations. And it is about quality dialogue, but it is about creating clarity and alignment. And I think the reason that people can avoid having healthy debate is they feel like things are getting personal. So things move from task conflict, and we actually want task conflict because we know we get different perspectives, we want to disagree, and we really want teams to disagree, but then we want teams to get aligned. But it's when it shifts from task conflict to relationship conflict is when it becomes an issue, and that's when things feel quite personal. And also being nice and passive behaviours also aren't helpful in a team as well. And I think people also have a fear of people's reaction. And some of that could be based on the culture within the team. It might be based on cultural backgrounds or personality or experience. So there's a lot of different variables. But I do have a model to help people understand how best to have healthy debate. Model is the 4 Ds of healthy debate. So the first D is around diagnose. So often teams are really good at having chat fests and, talking about all sorts of stuff and going off on tangents. But actually, first of all, diagnose, what's the problem we're trying to solve here? And get on the balcony and look at multiple interpretations, but get really clear, what is the problem we're actually trying to solve here? The second part is dialogue. So dialogue, this is about listening to learn, asking curious questions and sharing perspectives. And I think that's just a good model for collaboration just in general. So, balancing all of those things and suspending judgment as well, so that you're kind of listening and having perspectives. And even when I was with this team a couple of weeks ago that did the team purpose session, we wanted to practice healthy debate. And I sort of sat back and acted as a team coach. And at the 40-minute mark, I said, okay, I'm just jumping in here. Where do we think we are? And they felt like they'd diagnosed the problem, but they were just stuck in dialogue after 40 minutes. And that happens a lot. And that happens a lot in lots of different teams, because we sometimes we can talk in circles, or we've got so many different perspectives and we're reluctant to make a decision, or we're not clear as a team how we make a decision. So the third D is about decide. So be clear on how decisions are made as a team and play back what's decided so everyone's on the same page. And the final part is dedicate. And this is about getting aligned as a team, being that united front so that everyone's really clear of what's actually been agreed as a team and commit to that way forward together. Because I think what often happens is, people will go back and think this has been agreed, but something else has been agreed, and or it could be, I think we're doing this, but we're actually doing that. And that's a really good indication that the team's not aligned as a team. So first you've got to diagnose the problem you're solving, then have the dialogue, then decide, and then dedicate to the decision that's made.
Yeah. All right. Brilliant. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And thanks for sharing the model. I think that's a little sneak peek of what's in the book, which is very exciting. Let's jump into Allegra's question here. So team member Allegra sent this one through. What are some common mistakes businesses make that lead to unhealthy debate?
So I think common mistakes are that we create, have a lot of reinforcing mechanisms within teams that stop us from debating. So it could be how you're rewarded for things. So like having a fear of failure is often something that stops us debating things. It could be we haven't created the environment to be able to turn up the heat. And when I talk about turning up the heat, it's about doing it in a way that's constructive. So having that holding environment so that we can actually we can disagree and get diverse perspectives together. I think sometimes there can be some toxic dynamics that happen within teams within healthy debate. So I think the first one is often the natural defensiveness that often happens when we feel like someone's challenging us, and our need to be right, and that righteousness that often happens. I mean, our brains are hardwired to think that we're right. Obviously, I am, but everyone, thinks that they are right. But then that's not helpful as well, because then we hold our views so firmly that we can't be open to other views as well. And that's not helpful, because then we can't actually innovate and learn. And sometimes also the passive aggressive behaviors can come through as well. So I think it's about creating an environment and even giving permission to team members to debate, and even giving positive reinforcement when you see people sharing diverse perspectives. If you're a leader in the team or even a team member, asking curious questions like, what's a different perspective on that? Or what else? Well, what else are we not thinking about? So really trying to ask those curious questions to, promote diverse perspectives and demonstrate that that's something that we want within the team.
Love this. I mean, I think this one, the more I'm thinking about this, I'm just thinking how well this pairs with our first conversation. So I highly recommend, I'm going to put the link in the description so you can go check out our first episode, because I think this all sort of fits in together, how you can have debate and then that leads to accountability, and all these things I see how it all connects. So it's, I think this is a great sequel to what was a great first podcast. And that leads us into our final question here, which is from Kanika. And the question is, what are some positive examples that inspired you for this book when it comes to debate?
Yeah. So what was really interesting, I was actually at another book launch for a thought leader called Steph Bowen, and I was having a conversation, and I think I'd just recorded the podcast with David Clutterbuck where he challenged me about healthy debate. And I actually ended up writing about it in the book. I was chatting to this guy that was there, and he said, "Oh, I really encourage you to look into Tibetan debate." And I was like, "Oh, Tibetan debate, what's that?" And so they actually use the word debate in Tibet. And this is a philosophy that they use where they have this dramatic practice where they have two people that come together. There's a challenger who kind of stands up and claps and makes really loud noises, and the other person sits on the ground, and then they switch roles. And in Buddhist philosophy, it's about learning how to hold tension about different ideologies and being able to share different perspectives about the complexity of truth. And it's all about, debate being about mutual learning. So I just thought that that's an interesting story because I really delved into that because I thought it was useful. But a more practical example, maybe that if you don't identify as a Tibetan Buddhist monk, would be even, I'll use Hive Legal and another of the case studies that I used in the book. So Hive Legal, Joanna Green and Melissa Lyon, who I interviewed, they actually did a 360 for their leadership team, and they got this feedback that there was really high trust and really high cohesion, but there was really low challenge. And as they worked, they'd been working together for a long time, some of them up to 10 years. And what they'd noticed is they'd stopped having the hard conversations. They prioritized getting along and keeping cohesion, but they actually had avoided having the tough conversations. And so they actually were really intentional by creating a space to ask questions, to reflect and to disagree. And they made a commitment to lean into harder conversations. So they sort of shifted from being agreeable to kind of leaning into discomfort because they knew it was coming from a good place. And the other example was AFCA, so the Australian Financial Complaints Authority. So I found them super interesting because, in the last 6 years, they've tripled in size because of the amount of banking and finance and insurance complaints that are happening within Australia. And you can imagine, working for an organisation where it's all about complaints, and they have the highest engagement survey results. And I was like, wow, how are you so engaged where your people are listening to people complain all the time? Like that, they must be doing something really good there. And so I knew a few people who worked there, and Greg Pickering was the manager they suggested I speak to because he was leading a number of teams. He was in a leader role, and he inherited 2 teams that had really high employee engagement results. So one team had 100%, the other team had 80%, but they were not meeting performance expectations because you can have very happy teams. Engagement on its own doesn't actually mean you're high performing or thriving. And also when you're just hitting your performance targets, people might not be happy. So it's the and, not the or. But one of the things that he talked about was how when he works with teams, how he sets an intention about how as a team we can have an unconditional positive regard is what he calls it. But I'd call it's about having psychological safety and actually calling out, being really intentional that, we're not going to get offended when people say things. No matter what happens, we're still going to continue to view each other positively and we're going to stretch each other's thinking. And so he was really intentional around setting the scene around that with his teams, which I thought was really interesting. And I won't go into all the detail because it's more about accountability, but he really shifted those teams to be high performing and exceeded performance expectations over time too.
Wow. Well, Claire, some great answers here today, and thank you so much for jumping back on as friend of the podcast. Before we wrap up, though, I want to grab some final thoughts from everybody. So I might start with Danette. Danette, did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation?
Can't wait to get a copy of this book, Claire, because there's so many gems in there. In fact, I just loved it all. I loved just even that. How do we do it as leaders? So role modeling, the psychological safety, the vulnerability, and stuff like that. And I really like how you bring it back to the daily things we can do to continue to improve and encourage that healthy debate. So, yeah, very excited for you. Congratulations, and can't wait to read this book.
Thanks, Jeanette.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Danette. And glad we could have you on for Claire's podcast today. Glad we finally got you both on the same pod. Graham, did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation?
I do. Thanks, Jez. Thanks, Claire. It's been a great conversation once again. The thing that probably resonated most for me was some of the early comments that you shared around purpose and understanding why, and just that sort of 4 levels of purpose: organisation, team, work, and then the individual thing, and how. When you can create or build a team around people whose personal why is more aligned to the organisation's purpose, generally things can flow better from there. But again, it was great. And also congrats on the book. Well done.
Thank you.
Good to see you again. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Graham. Great questions today and great insights. John, any final thoughts on today's conversation?
Yeah, I think our timing was fantastic with the book arriving 10 minutes early or before the podcast. That was fantastic. So well done on that. A couple of takeaways I've taken is, that listening to learn. I haven't heard that expression before, but yeah, you're right. You got two ears and one mouth. Use them in that proportion, but listen to learn, and debate being about learning. So rather than going in and having to defend your position or attack the other person's position, use debate to learn. I found those 2 points really good. Thank you.
I want to echo John's. I had a lot of takeaways as well. I thought that the whys from the 4 different sort of perspectives, the organization, the team, the individual, and I just thought it was so interesting. And I also thought the 4 Ds of debate. And then I've also got to try this Tibetan debate. Who knows? That might be something that's down my alley. I'm not sure. A lot of great takeaways. I'm definitely going to have to pick up the book. Claire, did you have anything that you wanted to touch on that we haven't got to today, or any final thoughts on today's conversation?
No, just really very excited to see you all again, and super excited to launch the book on the 12th of November. So, yeah.
Yes, and so I was going to say, Claire, if people are interested in picking that up or they want to reach out to you in general, where's the best places for them to do that? And we'll pop the links in the description.
Yeah, perfect. So the best place if you're in Australia or New Zealand to buy the book or get in contact with me is on my website, which is www.thrivingculture.com.au, and that's thriving with a TH, not driving culture that sometimes I get. And then also we've got the Thriving Leaders podcast where we share the full interviews with the thought leaders from the book, and also the case study organisations online as well. So if you do want to dive in and hear the full versions, that's probably the best place. And then also if you're outside of Australia, it'll be on Amazon, Audible, Spotify, all the places.
I think we'll have to get Graham on for driving culture based on how much he's been driving in New South Wales this week. So that's where that goes. Claire, I want to thank you so much. Team, thank you so much. Another absolute classic episode. Anybody that's been listening to this, they like this conversation, they want to go check out that book, you can pre-order it right now if you're listening to it, or if you're in the future, maybe 2026 and revisiting this, you can obviously go to Claire's website as mentioned. I want to thank everybody for listening and sharing. We're now over 12,000 subs on YouTube. So thank you to everybody that's been sharing that. And to everybody, have a magical week.